The Heritage Foundation started in 1974, right? So it's goes way back. It's been, this kind of vector for far right ideology. The guy who's the head of the FCC who got Jimmy Kimmel fired wrote the chapter on the FCC,
Mm.
and it's not as radical as the stuff he's actually doing. So I'm gonna cast my vote for Richard Milhouse Nixon.
I'm curious if then has there ever been another administration that's crossed that line for you where you would firmly say, yes, they also were fascist or they did things that were fascist, or is Trump like a unique kind
Right.
of danger? Is this a unique moment in history for us?
You're talking to someone who's kind of this recognized the expertise I'm most famous for is knowing about Richard Nixon. So I wrote this book called Nixon Land. I wrote another book called Invisible Bridge that kind of covers Watergate. And I think it's pretty easy to argue that the Nixon coalition, Nixon's White House, had kind of fascist elements within it, right? These guys who were willing to break the law for the president in order to break into the Democratic headquarters, right?
Mhm.
This guy, G. Gordon Liddy, he wrote a autobiography in 1980, and he said he loved fascism, right? So
Mm.
that was one element, right? Um, but he was a complex guy with a complex administration at a complex time with a lot of cross-cutting forces. Now, being said, it's a really wild paradox of history that he won this colossal landslide in 1972, which really seemed to be a mandate against the left and all the forces of the 1960s. And we know from all kinds of evidence that he had a lot of stuff in mind that would have had us saying, wow, this guy's a fascist.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen because the burglars got caught and the society responded in a very civically admirable way and saying this will not stand. And he wasn't able to do what he wanted to do. But, he definitely, just to take one example, I write about this, I talk about this in a lot of interviews. He, after his reelection, fired his entire cabinet and made them reapply for their jobs. And like with the kind of what these generals are doing,
Uh,
like showing up at the behest of Pete Hegseth, they had to basically pledge loyalty for him to hire them back.
I was just saying, I
And
could see Trump doing that. That's
yeah,
maybe.
and you could see Trump doing that. And there's lots of other things. There's lots of things like the whole Project 2025 and then Doge, the whole thing about firing people, civil servants who are you're not supposed to be able to fire unless they don't do their jobs, and replacing them with people who serve at the president's will, who are political loyalists.
Yeah.
He actually had a project to do that too.
Mm. I'm curious, because you just brought up Project 2025. It made me think, when people talk about the Heritage Foundation, they
Hmm.
always say, a lot of people will say they wrote things for, I think it was Ronald Reagan, like
Right,
all the
right,
Republicans as well. Is that,
exactly.
I've never like looked into that. Is that something that you found like
Yeah,
anything
yeah.
they,
That was one of the first things I wrote about Project 2025 is that people do in fact forget the Heritage Foundation started in 1974, right? So it's goes way back. It's been, this kind of vector for far right ideology into the top echelons of the Republican Party in Washington since then. They basically took credit for Ronald Reagan's victory in 1980, and they wrote a 1,000-page book, which was basically Project 1980. It
Mhm.
was called Mandate for Leadership. There was a chapter, just like in Project 2025, for every kind of governmental unit, exactly what they should do, written by right-wing intellectuals, exactly like Project 2025. Some of them and going into prominent roles in the administration, just like Project 2025. And actually, Project 2025 had a bunch of different components, like a personnel operation and kind of a training operation. But the book that everyone refers to was actually called Mandate for Leadership,
Mhm.
which they put out every time there's a new Republican president.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, and people have seen
But
different
it, but
uses.
like there are a lot of commonalities between the 1980 volume, right?
Mhm.
The 2025 one definitely has some things in it that are more extremist than,
Yeah.
but those weren't really kind of, if those had been possible in 2020, in 1980, they might have been in there too, because that's kind of how authoritarians work. They grab what they can and try and push and push and push. And that's why it's so important. resist every probe
Mm.
because when they get away with something, they'll just try the next thing.
Makes it even scarier when you see like Gavin Newsom posted the thing. I don't know if you saw the tracker that said like I think it was like 60% or 70% of the things in
Oh,
2025
yeah,
or
yeah. I mean,
or
that's certainly, I mean, I'm one of the few people who's actually read through Project 2025, and I'm like, oh, that. And a lot of it is actually more extreme than Project 2025. Like the guy who's the head of the FCC who got Jimmy Kimmel fired wrote the chapter on the FCC,
Mm.
and it's not as radical as the stuff he's actually doing.
Wow, yeah, they didn't want to give all the secrets away, I guess.
But you could, but it's not hard to see that it's definitely wasn't hard to see someone like RFK Jr. coming because there's an absolute obsession with the idea that kind of public health measures to take on COVID and vaccines were, liberal plot to control us all. That's all over Project
Yeah, yeah,
2025.
the conspiracy nonsense. It's I could go on for days about that.
Yeah,
I did just kind of have two last questions for you. The
yeah,
first one is when the country kind of reaches this point where we're at this
yeah,
kind of boiling point, tipping point
yeah,
where Trump is like we agree he's doing fascism. Obviously
right.
things are boiling over. We're seeing it in the streets. What kind of avenues do people
Mhm.
have to kind of push back against this?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of good thing about this is that there's always a lot of avenues to push back, right? It's not like you have to be in some position of power in order to, or some super successful activist who can kind of call up, a bunch of people and get a massive number of people in the streets in order to actually fight back against fascism. Because one of the things that makes fascism, it's very intimate, right? It makes everyone kind of an agent of the bad stuff that's happening, right? It's inviting all of us to become, part of the cult,
Yeah.
really. So, it matters, for you to kind of persuade, your loved ones and friends who might be, kind of Trump curious, MAGA curious, right? And we've seen how many young people are vulnerable to that right now, and it matters, if you're on a jury, right? It matters that um, if you're on the jury or a grand jury, right? Now that the FBI director was indicted by a grand jury, and um, you are in the middle of a clearly um, illegal or unethical or vengeful prosecution, you have the choice to say, I'm not going to say guilty,
Yeah.
right? If you are work for the government and you're asked to pass along dodgy statistics, you say no. If someone, a loved one knocks on your door and says, I need an abortion, you take her to another state, right? If you see an ICE agent at someone's door, you yell through the door, you don't have to open unless they have a judicial warrant. Like there are so many opportunities. Um,
Yeah, no, I completely agree with a lot of what you said there. The last question I had for you, it's kind of a fun one, so bear
This
with.
is just a lovely quote by a writer. What is her name? I always forget her name, and now I can't give her credit, but maybe you can look it up. She says, Trump only has one power in the end, and that's to order people to do things. And all of us have the choice to either accept the order or refuse the order.
Yeah, I'll definitely find the quote, put it on the screen, so we
Yeah.
can't give her credit.
Rebecca Solnit, Solnit.
Okay, yeah, yeah, cool. So, the last question I had for you is kind of a fun one. So bear with me.
Okay.
You've obviously written about Nixon and Reagan. You've
Yeah.
lived through Trump, Reagan, maybe Nixon as well. I'm not sure.
I was born in September of 69,
Okay,
so
so yeah, kind
one
of.
of my first memories is definitely like my teacher saying "See you next year" before Christmas break in 1974.
Nice. Okay. So, well, you've written about all three. You've lived through two of them at least as a conscious human. Let's
Mhm.
say, here's my fun question. Let's say they all ran in a three-way election. You had to vote for one of them. Which one
Yeah.
and why?
So Nixon, Reagan, or Trump,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
That's pretty interesting. So the thing about Reagan is I could see him being really radical and extreme if there was more of a kind of a radical extreme. Like one of the things I did in my book Reaganland is I found these letters that he signed that his staffers wrote, and they were very kind of establishment centrist, sensible, right? Because that was what you had needed to do to get power then. But I also found his letters that were kind of dictated through his secretary, and they're all just loopy as hell,
Oh,
right? So he might have been like, "Oh, really? We can get rid of get rid of all these bureaucrats at the CDC. Great. I would have done that, but it wasn't possible, right?" And then Nixon, he had this power of shame. The fact that he was, kind of stepped down when he was caught, is not something that's very easy to see Reagan doing. And
or
Nixon, I'm
Trump.
sorry, Trump doing,
Yeah.
right? And he actually really wanted to be seen as a noble guy, right? So
Mm.
like, he almost did something that's inconceivable. He almost passed like a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans.
Oh, wow.
And one of the reasons was one of his staffers said, "Oh, you could be seen as the person who ends poverty," right? And
Mm.
then other guy said, "Well, no one will work," and so it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I feel like Nixon. I have a friend who knew Nixon well, had worked for him in the '80s, and became a very liberal guy. He's a Episcopal bishop in Los Angeles. And he said, well, if Nixon had hired as his chief of staff his longtime secretary, Rosemary Woods, she knew how to stop him from doing crazy stuff. But
Okay.
instead, she hired this guy, Bob Haldeman, who kind of had fascist proclivities. So I think Nixon could have been headed off at the pass. So I'm gonna cast my vote for Richard Milhous Nixon. You just make news with this. Yeah.
It'd be the election of the century, I'm sure.
Yeah, let me tell you. Let me tell you. Well, maybe they'll all get a chance to get the mayor of hell or something like that.
Right, right. And I'm sure the
Although
cabinet,
the standards are different down there, I hear.
yeah, they do.
Trump for sure.
Yeah, definitely Trump. But yeah, no,
Much
so
wild card.
if you want to shout out like your website, if you have like any books or articles or anything like that, your social media, feel
I'm
free.
kind of finishing a book right now, so I'm kind of hunkered down, but I definitely am on Blue Sky and Twitter under my name, Rick Perlstein. So I like to, mix it up there.
Cool. And yeah, I'll have those in the description if anyone wants to check it out. Thank you again for the conversation. I think it was really insightful.
Great job. Fantastic. Great. Look
Awesome.
forward to seeing what you come up with.
Awesome. Yeah. And I hope you enjoy your weekend, my friend.